Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
If you have a mobile phone, if you would like to put it on silent, please. Or turn it off before it cooks anything. Right, huge welcome to yet another new speaker. Asruþr Cyneaþsson with Odin and the Runes, Keys upon the Left-Hand Path. Arriving by the possibly controversial left-hand path, author of The Left Hand of Odin, Asruþr discusses concepts of free will, morality, runic magic and mythology, our potentials, and a practical introduction to the runes. Please welcome Asruþr.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for coming out on this stormy evening. It's somewhat appropriate. It's almost like the wild hunt is blowing out there, and yeah, thank you for taking the effort to get out. Tonight even, we'll run through, as Rob just said, and it'll be structured pretty much like this. So we'll have a brief look at who or what is Odin, for those who are unfamiliar with Odin. We'll have a look at the left-hand path, again, just to make clear what that concept is about. That should hopefully align with a short break. And then we'll have a look at Norse mythology and the particular references that frame Odin within a left-hand path context. And then what I will end with is the application of the runes and how they are mystery keys that can be used as tools to guide self-development. So, one of the fundamental questions then of the topic is who or what is Odin? And when you run a Google search, you find that he is a Norse deity. Yep, that's fairly accurate. You also find that he's a software tool for mobile phones, and of course a comic book character. And you get some fantastic images, some of which are perhaps more accurate than others. The one of Anthony Hopkins from the Marvel films is perhaps one of the more comical ones, pun intended. There's a bit of a strange depiction of Odin, very little resemblance to Odin within the mythology. So Odin within historical texts has many forms. Most common is essentially what drove Tolkien's depiction of Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's a one-eyed man, old man typically with a beard, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, usually draped over in a dark grey cloak or a dark blue cloak. Generally, he will be found to be carrying a staff or a spear, which is Gungnir, and at times he has been seen to be riding his horse, a grey horse called Sleipnir. And one of the fundamental characteristics of any appearance of Odin is that he is generally involved in some form of espionage or deceit, and you can very often apply a sense of distrust to an appearance of Odin, whether or not he appears in the form of a peasant farmer, and if you disrespect him, ultimately that would be the demise of your army in the subsequent battle. So it's not always taken as given. He shifts shape and shifts appearance and name. Many names, over 50 different documented names by which Odin refers to himself. There are the occasional appearance towards the later end of the mythology where we will find Odin battle-clad and wearing shining armour, riding a horse, that generally depicts the forthcoming start of an epic battle in Scandinavia. And the last occurrence of that was only 300 years ago, where a general thought he saw Odin ride past the start of the battle line. Subsequently won the battle. Odin also, interestingly, as we'll get into in the mythology, is capable of taking animal form. This is something that occurs within the sagas, and we'll look at in its relevance to the left-hand path. For those not too familiar with Norse mythology, this is essentially the pantheon of deity and cosmological alignment of those beings. Starting at the top with one of my favourites, which is Odin, the cosmic cow, and the two proto-beings, Yma on the left there, and Bor. Bori is an interesting being, as he was licked out of the salt rhinestones by Odin, the cow. Yma, the asexual being, gave birth to most of the Jotun, or the giants, of Norse mythology, out of his sweaty armpits, knees, elbows, various body parts. So you can see the lineage there of how Odin comes out of Buri and Besla, his mother, and his brothers Vili and Ve, or Honor and Lothar, depending on which aspect of the mythology you're reading. You also see off to the right there, you've got the Vanir gods descended from the north, most commonly represented by Yngve Frey and Freya. You can also see everybody's favourite within a heathen context or a Norse mythological approach, Thor, as the son of Odin there as well. You also see, especially within a Marvel context, popular at the moment, Loki has descended there from the Jotun side, and the offspring of Loki, the beasts, the Sleipnirs, the Fafnir wolf, Hel, and Jormungand, which we will look at within their context as well. Odin has many etymological links as a name, most commonly Othin, Wotan, Woden, or Wothanas as the Proto-Germanic form. Wothanas is especially interesting, as at the root of that we find the word wode, which is a term that denotes inspiration. And this is especially appropriate for Odin, as it links with the inspiration of an artist, or even the battle rage of a berserker or a soldier in the heat of battle. Given Odin's aspects as a god of poetry and death, it's very much appropriate. And we find within the body of Norse mythology, one of the more interesting and early tales is that of Gylfaginning, perhaps even one of the most significant. It describes the coming into being of the gods and the alignment of the Norse cosmology that is Yggdrasil, the world tree. The tale sees Swedish king Gylfi venture to Asgard, the home of the Aesir gods, and he finds 3 thrones, positioned one above the other, with 3 beings on them. One introduces himself as high, one just as high, and one the third. Interestingly, third later explains the many names of Odin. As we see in the quote there, he's called the All-Father. He is the father of all the gods. He's the Valfather, father of the slain, associations with battle. He's the hanging god, and he has many names. And later within the mythology, it explains he's known by a different name around the world and takes many different forms. Within the tale itself, the suggestion, it's implied that Gylfi is actually in conversation with 3 forms of Odin, and each of the beings are a hypostasis of Odin himself, and not separate entities. Of course, that has Catholic resonance in this day and age, but it was there some 800 years ago when this was written down. So as I mentioned before, when we were looking at the Norse pantheon, Odin has 2 brothers, Vili and Ve, or Honor and Lothar, depending on the source. And these are more commonly now thought of as being a trinity of hypostasis of Odin, so various forms that, almost in a Jungian psychological approach, create the being that we think of as Odin. And this may even have some associations on a Proto-Indo-European context with Shiva and the associations of Shiva and Vishnu within Brahma. The consciousness of Odin has consequences that he is aware of his own limitations, and certainly his name etymologically is linked to consciousness through Wirthanas. Vili and Ve certainly link to aspects of will and the ability to discriminate between what is the self and what is other, thus forming a complete psychological approach to individuation. Obviously, it's important because only with knowledge of the self are you able to act with moral certainty, and this is something that throughout the mythology Odin is certainly able to do so, regardless of social context and morality that surrounds him and the views of the other gods and deity upon those. Within the mythology, what we find are the sons of Bor, Odin, Vili and Ve. They structured the manifest realm from the remains of what is essentially their proto-being grandfather, Yima. Certainly on some aspects, if you think that Besla didn't come from Bor, their father, so she's likely to be of Jotun descent. What we have is a tale of destruction of an ancestor in order to create a structured and ordered manifestation. It's the brothers that also give life and breath to man, but it is interestingly only implicit that the giver of breath to man is Odin. It's also implied that the second brother gives consciousness and the third gives movement and physicality to man. The sources from Sturluson are not explicit in the identification of which deity gives which gift to man. As I said though, with the root of Wirthanas as Wode, then it is highly likely that consciousness is a gift of Odin and not any of the other hypostasis forms. What we also have is the mythology that the brotherhood evolves elsewhere, and we later find a notion that in the absence of Odin, Vili and Ve share his possessions, including his wife Frigg, and they assume rulership of Asgard when Odin is presumed missing and dead on one of his many journeys. So, as I said, one of the more interesting aspects is the formation of the manifest cosmological alignment of Yggdrasil, and this is in the slaying of their ancestor Yima. And this is interesting on many aspects. It explains the manifestation on a causal plane, the primal matter of Niflheim coming into contact with the raw energy of Muspelheim, which brings forth Yima and the cow Dunla. The second being Buri, father of Odin Vili Ve, has ultimately a son Bor, and this is perhaps where we find some association with the Hindu mythology. Buri bearing similarities with Vishnu, who emerges into the void, where once there was only Brahma. And we also see similar within Egyptian mythology, where we have the emergence of Nun and the cosmic cow Mehedwed, who brings forth Atum Ra. Atum Ra has very similar associations and aspects to Buri, but also perhaps to Odin and Shiva in terms of creation and destruction. So the associations, as I say, they imply that Odin is likely of mixed descent, having both Jotun as chaotic manifestation, and if we view Bor as beings descended, polarization aspect of that, then they represent consciousness as opposed to chaos. Odin combines both of them, and it's that combination that sets Odin apart from the other deities within the Norse mythology.